Okay, welcome to the fourth Honest Night. For those of you who haven't been here before, I will give you a quick intro as to why we're sitting here. I like to be honest about the struggles and the difficulties of building things, because we're all building things. And in the age of social media and in the age of everyone trying to look their best, none of us are honest. So I decided that I should get other smart people who have done really smart things and struggled through those things to talk to me and be honest about the struggles. And that's really what an Honest Night is about. So I'm going to welcome Aisha. I'm not going to introduce her. In the way that we do things here is I ask you to tell us about yourself. And you can give us an intro of however you would want to be introduced. So go ahead, tell us who you are and what you do and why and all the rest.
Okay, so I'm I suppose in a work context, I'm the founder and CEO of a company called SweepSouth, which is a platform that connects domestic workers who are unemployed or underemployed with homeowners who are looking for their services. I'm also a mom and a wife to someone who happens to be my co-founder and partner in the business as well.
Which we'll get into.
Yeah. And I'm a former scientist and someone who is trying to make a dent in the country and in the world with what we're trying to build.
Cool. So speaking of scientists, it's quite a trip. I built my first business when I was 16, so I knew that this is what I wanted to do, right? That is not you.
Yeah.
You studied microbiology, biochemistry, and you have a PhD in human genetics.
Yeah.
How the fuck are you building a business? Like, how did that happen?
Yeah.
This is YouTube, so we can swear. It's cool.
So I went into the science field because I've always been someone who's very inquisitive. I've always been very outcomes oriented, and so being an inquisitive child, I always wanted to know how things work, and science is that, right? It's like the discovery of things, and whatever the field is that you're studying in science, discovering how that thing works. And I went on with genetics to try and find out from a genetic point of view, how do humans work? When things go wrong and people have diseases, how do we make those things better, and how do we fix those things?
Okay.
But I think, some way down studying, firstly, I was really bad at science. So I was bad at the actual curriculum of it. Only got good at varsity when we started to work on research projects. But then towards the end of my PhD, started to realize that as a scientist, I was working in a research laboratory that was very far removed day-to-day wise from the reality of living in South Africa and what people encounter. And so decided that business was a more interesting place where you can build things and they can be realized and impact ordinary people.
Okay, but I want to pick that up apart, because you're sitting and you're a human geneticist, and you calculatedly thought, I'm going to now shift to business.
Yeah, so I thought
I
thought I'm going to be a researcher. I'm going to work on gene therapy. I'm going to cure genetic diseases. That's the outcome.
Okay.
And then I realized through my research, actually, this is going to take 20, 30 years from today to actually having something that people, that benefits people. And then it was, well, where can I work in a space where it's not going to take 20, 30 years to impact people? And so to me, business was the answer.
Okay.
Also, I'd kind of heard about management consulting as a field and something that people who are wanting to transition into business get into, and they were taking people who had done science, and so I thought that'd be
cool.
A way to get into business. I wasn't yet ready to kind of jump straight into it.
Cool, that makes sense. So it's just sticking with this for a little bit, the qualifications you have they helped you in any interesting ways at SweepSouth?
Yeah, I definitely, in an interesting way. So, I obviously took maths at varsity. We used maths in developing the algorithms behind how SweepSouth works. I think less from a qualifications point of view, but more just the process of being a student and learning, and some of the way that you get taught to think. I think there's a lot of criticism about, university and in the startup world, and you're wasting your time, and being a dropout is celebrated. But I think what's great for me about university is that it teaches you how to think. It teaches you how to think critically, and you get taught to self-manage. I saw flames in my first year at varsity. 8 o'clock, lecture, maths, and you're now of legal age,
Yeah.
and your parents aren't dropping you off in the morning. Like, it was bad.
Yeah.
So you get taught how to self-manage, and I think those were all things that were very useful when it came to building SweepSouth as well.
Cool. Do you make your team call you doctor?
No, I don't.
Because that would be awesome. Dr. CEO, that's me.
No, I don't make anyone call me
Okay.
doctor, and it's especially awkward when you have a doctorate and you're not a medical doctor. Because everyone asks you if you're a medical doctor and if you can help in case of an emergency, and you have to say
Yeah,
no.
no, I can't. Cool. So kick off now into the more meat of the subjects. Some broad questions. Do you feel like entrepreneurs between each other, we're not honest? And if so,
Yeah.
why?
Yeah. There's definitely like this sort of this front that you feel like you have to put up. I think not just with other entrepreneurs, also just in public. I think especially once you start to be successful and it starts to become kind of public that you're successful. So yeah, people lie, and there's this, it's always like everything's going amazing, we're crushing it, and I think there are a lot of reasons why. I think the one is that by definition, entrepreneurs are competitive people.
Yeah.
I think we also define ourselves by the success of our businesses. And so to not be crushing it is, like as a person, I'm not doing that great. So it's brutal. So yeah, we definitely fake it a lot. Yeah.
Okay. I stumbled upon this phrase last year that really captured me, and it's called struggle porn,
Yeah.
where you fantasize
Yeah.
about the struggle.
Yeah.
Like work 20 hours,
Yeah.
don't sleep. Like I've been
Yeah.
at this for 7 years, and
Yeah.
it's amazing. And I found that phrase, and it just struck such a chord with me
Yeah.
because I see it in young entrepreneurs everywhere.
Yeah.
I can say that now that I'm turning 35. There are 20-year-olds who are like, yeah, I worked 30 hours today.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Like, how do you respond to that?
Yeah, so it's like the hashtag startup life, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh my word, just, went to bed at like 2 a.m. or whatever. I think we associate hard work with output, which is wrong. So, I'm working hard, I must be doing well.
Yeah.
Whereas it's more about, what are you actually producing? What are you actually delivering?
And that's how you say it theoretically. Do you live that life?
I think until very recently, yes, and was very guilty of that as well.
Yeah.
I think the thing about getting a bit older and not romanticizing that sort of thing is that you just get so tired that you're like, I like, this is bullshit. I'm not going to keep on like.
Physically can't
I
go
actually
without
cannot,
sleep.
and it's not cool. Like it's not cool when I come into the office and I look terrible, and the first thing that one of my team tells me, and the person who told me it is here somewhere, is you look really tired. Are you okay?
Yeah, I got that this morning.
Yeah. It happens all the time, and it's not, it's not cool, and it's a reflection of, someone's recognizing that you don't look on top of your game, you look bad. So I think we're all guilty of it. Yeah, I think people will always do it. I think, it's, I think it's like a very millennial type thing where, we value work, and I'm proud of my work, and my work means something about me and what I do. But yeah, it can be unhealthy.
Cool. Tell me something that you've recently overcome.
Pregnancy.
Okay, all right, cool.
Yeah, you weren't expecting that one.
No.
Yeah, I mean, I've just had a baby who's 2 months old, and it's my third child, and yeah, and I mean, pregnancy was hectic. Having a new baby is hectic. Having 3 kids is brutal. Running a business and having 3 kids is suicidal.
Being the CEO of a business while being pregnant
Yeah.
must be quite a thing.
So I think, while being pregnant, more maybe psychologically. Like we've been fundraising while I was pregnant, and I had a lot of not guilt, but a lot of kind of, and not guilt, not shame, but I felt it was difficult to go to an investor and and have like this huge stomach and kind of like, do I raise it? Do they raise it? Do I have to make them feel okay about the fact that I'm not going to suddenly quit and be raising my kids instead of running the business?
What a severely fucked up thing to have to think about.
It is completely screwed up. Yeah, it's messed up.
And so, like, how do you deal with it in the room? Because most of the time you're pitching to VCs who are mostly men, and like, what comes up?
So, I mean, and this is not necessarily the best way to do it, but I would say to people, I have 2 other kids, and I've accomplished what I have with 2 other children, and so that's
what's up.
That's not an issue. And then encourage people to raise concerns, and that's one. I'll say to them, like, what are your concerns? And then look them dead in the eye and dare them to say anything.
Dare them to look down and just
exactly.
That's great.
So yeah,
Cool.
but I mean, from a running a business point of view, and I think, like being pregnant is a condition. It's a human condition. It's not an illness.
Yeah.
I can do everything, pretty much everything that that I can do, and certainly in terms of running a business, I could do everything that I could do while not being pregnant.
Yeah.
I think post the pregnancy is a lot more difficult.
Okay, we will definitely get into that a bit more. So right now, what's keeping you up at night?
A 2-month-old baby.
That's an easy out. Come on, philosophically. No, that's fair. That's fair.
No, but apart from that, I think it's so like you go through these different phases, I think, as an entrepreneur. You in the early days, it's very much about like, building a startup, and you read a lot about like, what does it take to build a startup, and was consuming like the Paul Graham and all the early stage investor stuff.
Yeah.
And now it's become very much, and my concerns and what's on my mind is very much about, as the business scales, being a founder who's doing this for the first time and effectively only having 4.5 years of experience building a business. How do I grow fast enough to catch up with the business and with everyone who we're bringing on board?
Oh, you mean how do you grow?
How do I grow as a person?
Yeah.
So, how do I make sure that I keep on being the CEO that SweepSouth, our customers, my team, the domestic workers who work on the platform deserve? When you're working and, when you're employed, you kind of grow, I suppose, with like your job, your roles and your salary and whatever, and you're, growing like 20, 30% and kind of being pushed incrementally. Here, you suddenly have a business that's grown in a year like 5, 10 times, and you've got to grow accordingly. You have, 10 times the staff, 10 times the revenue, and so you've got to
10 times the heartache and the pain.
10 times the pain.
The stress.
Yeah. And you've got to answer to that. And then also you, as the business matures, you also start working with a more sophisticated team. And so how do you manage people who are experienced, who know what they're doing, and make sure that you don't look like an absolute idiot most of the time?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm going to put you on the spot. How do you do those things?
I read a lot.
Okay.
What I've read has completely changed
Yeah.
From when we launched. I mean, and I never thought I would say this about myself,
Yeah.
but I read management books. It's like,
Wow, like genuine business management type books.
Yeah, so both, two different types. So the one is, I really like reading about experiences of other founders who've gone through this journey. One of my favorites is Ben Horowitz's The Hard Thing About Hard Things. I go back to that really often because he just tells it like it is. Andy Grove's book, High Output Management, another good one, very technical at times. And then, I read management books as well. Like, this is how you do a performance review. This is how you, very boring. But and you use those things.
Yeah.
And it's so corny, but you use those things in how you manage people.
I'm amazed at how few startup founders read. Just read.
I'm amazed at how few people read in general.
No, it's crazy.
It's like once you leave school, I don't know, like social media becomes.
And funny for me was the opposite. I hated reading at school. Got out of university and just started reading.
But you could choose what.
I could choose what I was reading, and like you, I needed to move. I needed to get better, and there was no one teaching me. So you have to self-educate, and the only way to do that is to read and YouTube. Now I think helps, but okay, cool. So tell me about your biggest failure.
I mean, this is a tough one because I don't feel like I have a big catastrophe moment, right? Like, I mean, there are things that we failed at. We've launched products with SweepSouth that have failed.
I'm going to interject.
Yeah.
Your biggest failure, not the business. Yeah, not the business's biggest failure, because that's going to come and go, and you'll deal with them as a
tough.
CEO.
I mean, I'm such an optimist. It's a really difficult one.
The looks of things, it sounds like you just don't believe you fail. Like what?
No, I mean, I don't. I mean, I fail every day. So the biggest one's difficult, but I fail. I fail all the time. I feel like I fail all the time at being a CEO. I fail all the time at, I manage things incorrectly. I jump to assumptions. I fail as a parent for sure. I mean, being as busy as we are. But I don't. There's no catastrophe, and that's not necessarily a good thing. I think not having something that you've put everything into and that hasn't worked out might speak to the fact that I don't actually take enough risks. My risks are probably too calculated.
Interesting.
Okay.
And how do you frame failure in your life? Like, how does it exist in your world?
So it exists as, I think, something that's necessary. That's necessary for learning, necessary for progressing. Like I said, I think I have little failures that I learn from all the time. It's something that, and particularly the small things, right? Like I'll have a meeting with a team member and think, shit, that went really badly. Like, I didn't plan for that to go that badly, crap. And then I have a life coach who I'll then speak to about those things. So I see failure as inevitable. I see it as something to learn from. I definitely don't have the feeling that I think is also popular nowadays that failing is cool. It feels awful.
Yeah.
So, it's not something to aim towards. Yeah. But yeah, it's part of growth.
I think it's an important distinction that's getting blurry at the moment is striving for failure is different to enjoying and
celebrating the failure itself,
exactly.
right? The learning and how you deal with it should be celebrated, but not the failure
exactly.
itself.
Exactly.
Yeah. I saw a pitch deck the other day where the person had under their profile had just put dropout, university dropout, and I was like, that's not the thing, it's the other stuff around that. So I think sometimes we conflate, the reason why things are discussed.
Cool, useful. What's worse than failing for you?
The very corny, line that what's worse than failure is not getting up again at the end. I think,
cool.
I think, what's worse than failure is kind of accepting it as the end. And I think what's worse than failure is also feeling shame about failure.
Yeah.
I think, kind of feeling that it's something that defines you.
Which is hard to get over. And a lot of the time it's hard to get over because people don't talk about it often enough. Because it's this thing that you hide and tuck away, and you try and protect your family and friends from the fact that you sucked at something, or that it didn't work out, or that you tried and didn't make it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in many cases it's also about, what I said earlier, which is that people kind of confuse or tie in your personal success or failure with your business success or failure. And your business becomes so closely tied to your internal compass of how you feel about yourself that failures with your team, with your business become, I'm not good enough, I'm a bad person, I'm not worthy. And that's obviously bad.
So it's the second time you brought that up, marrying your work and your person. How do you deal with that? Because it is something that everyone, I think, struggles with, whether you're at a corporate or an entrepreneur. Your value is your boss gives you a raise and you feel good about your life. Meanwhile, your life and your work are separate. Well, I mean, I think it's normal. Like you spend the most time at work, as doing one thing. I suppose sleeping, if you do get enough sleep, is the other thing. But otherwise, apart from that, you spend more time at work than you do doing anything else. And so it makes sense because all of the inputs that you get, or the majority of inputs that you get, have to do with your work environment and how you do as a employee, business person, founder, whatever it is. And how are you dealing with that?
I'm coaching, so seeing a life coach, separating the two from each other, reflecting. I think what we tend to do as entrepreneurs is you look forward and your definition of whether you're successful or not becomes about what I am going to achieve versus what I have done. And sometimes it's small things, like, you don't celebrate a learning, you don't celebrate like being healthy. You don't celebrate being mentally healthy. So just having some perspective about all of those things. And then I think, as much as I feel like I often fail as a parent, I think the great thing about parenting and having a family is that it gives you perspective. I also have parents who have had long careers and who've dealt with a lot more than I have. And so when my dad says to me, when I was your age, someone was shooting at me, and I was fearing for my life, it definitely gives you different perspective, to what you're doing.
Cool. And on that point, what have you personally sacrificed to get to where you are?
A lot, I think, especially from a business point of view, like kind of post starting SweepSouth. So personal relationships for sure. I don't think existing relationships as much. I've been lucky to have a great group of friends from high school who've more or less stayed together, which is great, and they kind of put up with the fact that I'm always late. And I'd go to dinner with them and literally open up my laptop I think about it now and I'm mortified. And
I was
think
going to say, that's your
that
stuff.
is so
Yeah.
damn rude. Like I would open up a laptop at dinner and be like, excuse me guys, I've just got to work. So, and luckily they're still friends with me.
I mean, I heard you were even late for your wedding.
Yes, I was. Who told you
Nice.
that?
I know people, yeah.
Yeah, I was very late for my wedding.
Nice, very nice.
But so yeah, definitely personal relationships. I mean, there's been material sacrifice around starting the business,
Yeah,
you know.
which we'll get into.
Yeah. And then I think something that I definitely think about more now and I'm selfish about is I've sacrificed a career. Like, you know, as an entrepreneur and as someone who is smart and who had a good career ahead of me, I've sacrificed that kind of like proven easy, relatively easier route for this other world.
I've never had anyone with that perspective. That's really interesting. So do you define yourself now as an entrepreneur if you had to, or are you someone who might go back to the career?
No, I could never, ever go back to a career. But what I do think about is the impact of what we're building and what that has to become. Because it wasn't a case of I've got nothing to lose. Like there was a lot to lose. There was sacrifice. So I've got to be conscious about what we get out of it. And I think a lot of founders don't do that. You know, you initially maybe think about that and you've got this huge business, but then it becomes about proving yourself and you kind of carry on this journey and you have something to prove, a lot of the time very much to yourself, but you don't think about the fact that, like, you know, you've got to at some point get back the house that you sold, the stuff that you cashed in, the career that you gave up.
The pot of gold at the end
your
of the rainbow.
years back that you'll never, exactly.
Yeah.
So it becomes about that. It's kind of, it's top of mind now. Like, you know, I tell myself, you didn't give up this career for nothing, so it's motivation.
Cool. Which is a good segue into your career. So you were in this management consultancy, and you and I spoke before this, and you mentioned to me that, like, you would go to work and from work in tears.
Yeah.
And you hated your life.
Yeah.
And your husband and soon-to-be founder was the same.
Yeah.
And that you both resigned from your jobs at the same time.
Yeah.
And you had kids at this time.
Yeah. Yeah.
What, like, how does that happen when a couple who are doing really well just go, we're out?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people feel this, right? That you're like stuck in this slog, this daily slog of like being employed somewhere that's not giving you purpose and meaning and isn't giving you daily joy. Like, I think you should have, even when things are really bad as an entrepreneur, you should be getting some sort of joy from behind the purpose of what you're doing. And so we were at this point where the two of us, I mean, I was very stressed every day because I was leaving home, trying to get my daughter to school on time, had this weird window where I had to get her to school once the school had opened, and it only opened at a certain time, but then that meant that I'd probably get to work later than everyone else. And so I would get to work late every day, feel guilty coming into work, kind of slink in, trying to like avoid everyone, would sit at my desk. I didn't not enjoy the work, it was fine.
Yeah.
But then I'd just feel pressure the whole day to be performing and for people to see. And so because I'd come in late, leave at the end of the day late, make sure I was the last person leaving. And I was just very conscious of all of those things, and it became about the wrong stuff. And then I would have, I was living in Joburg, and I'd have this horrible drive on the M1 in Joburg back from the CBD, which is awful. I'd see people be like hijacked in front of me and just be like, what am I doing? Like, why am I doing this? And we'd think about, like, I mean, it sounds really lame, but I'd be like, this is not what I imagined when I imagined life, and this is not what I imagined myself doing at this age. So yeah, it was quite depressing. And I think,
how old were you at that time?
I was 20, how old was I, 27?
Okay.
And Alan was going through a similar thing, I think, where he was also just trying to find meaning in what he was doing. His experience was different. He was like loving life outside of work. So he was, and like his employer is going to find this out one day and come back and dock his pay away. But he was like literally going to see movies in the middle of the day because he was so bored at work. And I think what horrified him was the fact that his employers were like, you're doing an amazing job, this is great, like we're trying to fast track you, and we were both just like, as people, is this it? Like, and I think that's what was really depressing. And so it just kind of came to a head where there were enough days where I literally was driving home and just crying, thinking like, you know, is this the rest of my life? And I'd look at my managers who were amazing people, but I just think I don't want to be that one day. I don't want to work towards that. I don't want to, in 3 years, keep doing this to get to that. And so we resigned from our jobs, pretty much within like 1 or 2 months from each other.
I mean, I want to stop you because it's an interesting way you're telling the story, but to get from, hey, this work is fine, which most people would say that about their jobs, to, the drive is long, most people would say that about their jobs, to, fuck this, I'm out. That's a big leap. And you're saying it in a very flippant way. And I don't think it was flippant. I think you guys must have had a moment where you were both like, no more. And like, what was that moment? I mean, if it wasn't a moment, that's fine.
No, there were a few things. Like, there were a few things I think that were just like, no, come on. So I think for Alan, it was the being fast track thing where he was like, come on, guys, literally, like. I'm doing a bad job. How can you think this is a good job? And he was like, you know, it's kind of like, you know, then you kind of don't deserve me if this is the best that you feel you can get from me. And then for me, it was after all of that, you know, and the whole like faking it of like, you know, staying late and sitting around. My work's done. I'm doing a great job, but I'm staying late just so that people can see me here and say I'm not a slacker. And then after that, having a conversation with my manager who said, you're doing a really great job. You obviously are very qualified because a lot of the other consultants were kind of graduates or had honors degrees. So you're obviously very qualified. You're doing an amazing job. We're getting great feedback from your from the rest of your team. You've ranked second amongst your peer group, but actually there's someone else who started who was at the company before you were, and from a promotions point of view, we really have to promote them because they'll be upset if we promote you before them. And I think that was the point where I was like I'm not enjoying it. I'm not getting a promotion. Fuck this. Yeah.
Cool. And I mean, that's the point. That's what I was looking for. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. But it wasn't. I mean, it wasn't a. You know, it was a gradual process. It's you know, every day it's eating at you, and that was the straw. I think, because what I don't want to also do is promote this false notion that like entrepreneurs are mavericks and we make these crazy decisions like just off the cuff, you know.
No, we make stupid decisions most of the time.
Exactly.
Yeah. Let's promote that. This is really hard. We're all going to fail. It's really difficult. Okay, so sticking with this theme, you said to me when we met last, romanticism is bullshit. That came out of you telling me the story of the difficulties that you had around your home, the seed funding, 500 startups. There's a whole story here that you told me in a really great way that had my heart beating fast. Tell me that story and why it led you to romanticism is bullshit. Right off the back of entrepreneurs make stupid decisions, this is a great story.
So I think like the idea of you sold your home is used, and our investors have done it as well. It's used as like this testament that you've got skin in the game. But I think people read that and they don't fully appreciate what that means and how bad it actually is to go through that process. Our own experience was that we started SweepSouth. We didn't sell our home up front. You know, we started it. We said, let's cash in our pension, which is also a pretty hectic move.
We didn't sell our home first. We just cashed in our pension.
Our whole future. Like,
that's great.
So we cashed in our pensions and used all of our savings to start the business. And you know, we're running it, and then actually raised some funding, and we're okay for a while. And this isn't something that's like, you know, we've kind of talked about a lot, but we got accepted into this accelerator program in Silicon Valley, and the terms of it were that you get an investment from them as well. So 500 startups, and you know, really well known, amazing opportunity. And so we decided to go after it, but we were getting to the end of our runway. And San Francisco is fucking expensive. And so we, basically, you know, took flights and landed over there, and we're waiting for the investment to come through. From them. That was part of this thing. But we had to go through a whole process, and there was this legal document that was part of the investment that had never been used in South Africa before, so our lawyers had to try and navigate this thing. And in that time, we were running out of money, and so basically had to make the decision to either call it quits or to get more real. And so we ended up selling our house and everything in it, literally, like had
Really?
someone come and, put a price tag on every single thing in the
So
house.
there are people
and-
who do that.
Yeah, I was
I
surprised.
did not know that,
I was
yeah.
surprised. There are people who do that. They definitely screw you.
Yeah.
So, you get like, I don't know, 5-10% of what everything's worth.
Wow.
But yeah, and went through that process. And it's horrible. It's gut-wrenching to, buying a home is such a big step that you go through, and it's part of being an adult, and it's something that you own that is a sanctuary, and as a basic human need, right? Like, Maslow's hierarchy, it's, shelter is low down on the pyramid. And so to sell that and give it all away was horrible. And we have a daughter, our daughter's 9 now, but she was probably about five or six at the time. And she absolutely bawled her eyes out. And she said to Alan, like, someone else is going to swim in my swimming pool. And it was horrible.
That's
It was really
brutal.
horrible, yeah. And I think, Alan still can't drive up the road that we used
Fair
to live
enough,
in, because
yeah.
it's just, it's
So like,
horrible.
what is that commentary on what building businesses does to people? Because your priorities shifted very dramatically
Yeah.
from kids, house, career to don't need the house, don't need a pension, kids will take with us,
Yeah.
nothing else matters.
Yeah, and I
Like-
think it's something you've got to be careful about, right? Is
Yeah.
that I think a lot of entrepreneurs so people talk about grit and having grit, and it definitely is a very essential attribute, I think, for this like really difficult journey. But sometimes you can take it too far, and you have to have this conviction in yourself, and it's not ego, but it's this personal kind of conviction about the drive that you will have and how you'll drive yourself to succeed. And you've got to be careful, because you can become almost maniacal about achieving that thing. So it becomes, I'm going to do it at all costs. So looking back, I don't regret doing it, but I definitely think like, wow, that was hectic.
Yeah, there is that fine line, and I think Elizabeth Holmes at Theranos is
Yes.
now the most talked about
Yeah.
person on the wrong end of that line,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely,
Is
yeah,
the
yeah.
maniacal is true.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
wasn't just at all costs of her life, it was
Yeah.
at all costs of anyone's life.
Absolutely.
She was going to be a billionaire and
Yeah.
screw everything else.
Yeah, yeah.
I think you're right, there is that very fine line of insane
Yeah.
and building a business.
And I think you've got to ask yourself, why am I doing this, right?
Yeah.
Like, am I doing this to prove a point to myself?
Yeah.
Is it some sort of, personal project to prove that I can do this? Or is this business actually still worth it? Does it still have merit? Am I going to look back in a few years and say this was just a very big, but it was a big speed bump? Lying to your investors and faking your product is not a
It's
speed
whole
bump.
nother
That's
thing.
a whole
Yeah.
nother,
Yeah, that's nuts. Okay. Then what is the single most important thing that you know now about business that you didn't imagine you would ever know
Yeah.
studying human genetics?
Yeah. I think the one thing is, like, business owners, whether you're like anyone who's in a senior position and is managing people and has responsibility, a lot of responsibility, the responsibility of whether a business works or not, like, you are gangster. Like, it is so hectic running a business. It is the amount of things that you have to try and juggle
Yeah.
at the same time as making rational decisions, at the same time as trying to keep up a good face, at the same time as trying to convince your team that you know what you're doing and that you should be leading them. It's incredibly difficult. And I think as an academic, I was quite shielded from that, or in the academic world, I was quite shielded from that. Like, when I look back at it, your environment's quite cushy. You're dealing with people who are all high IQ. Obviously that's not the only measure of intelligence, but you're dealing with people who are all high IQ, who all think similarly to you do. The way that they're funded is quite risk-free. Like, universities have to exist. They get funded by, by governments and all sorts of grants and whatever. So it was a very sheltered environment, I think, and not just starting SweepSouth, but even getting into management consulting. I was working in the mining industry during the time when the Marikana massacre happened, and I think it just really hit home, having to see the way that CEOs in the industry were dealing with it. I was like, business is hardcore. It's real.
Yeah, and it's easy to criticize
Absolutely.
from a distance
Yeah.
because obviously Mark Zuckerberg's screwing everything up.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but he's our age.
Yeah.
He's our age, and he
Exactly.
controls that business.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be able to do
Yeah,
it.
and has to make those sorts of decisions that have
Yeah.
those sorts of implications.
And affects
incredibly difficult.
like governments, and it's intense.
Yeah. It's a 30-year-old guy having to sit in front of
That's crazy.
an EU commission and explain
No,
why his
I have
business
no
is
interest
doing
in
what
that.
it's doing. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
and that actually brings me to an interesting question around why you do things, right? He was 19 when he started Facebook. He did not start Facebook to be in front of the EU Commission. He did not do it to. So
Yeah.
you've just listed a whole bunch of shit that is nuts for people to do when you start businesses, yet you're still doing it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
why? Like, what's your why?
So apart from, I think there's a why that is a personal why, and then there's a why that's evolved through building SweepSouth.
Cool.
I think the personal why is wanting to feel like I've built something that has value, to wanting to feel personally like the fact that I exist means something.
Okay.
So, I want to have a positive impact, but why? Like, my existing on this earth should be positive. It should result in a net positive outcome. And I think there's a legacy part to that as well. I want to contribute in a way that extends past myself. And then from a SweepSouth point of view, I mean, it answers those things. It's, initially it was like, let's build something that's a business and that makes sense from a tech platform point of view. Let's build something that customers want. But the why kind of evolves. And I think it's the same for Mark Zuckerberg, right? Like, he built a social network not thinking it was going to be this huge, and not thinking that it was going to have the sort of impact on the world that it's had.
Yeah.
And so with SweepSouth, it was a platform that connects two sides together and would answer a customer problem. But now it's about the notion that people who are able to provide a service and want to earn an income for themselves should be able to do it in a dignified way through a platform, and should have the dignity of being able to provide for their families. I think one of the most difficult things in South Africa at the moment is the fact that there's so many people who are sitting at home and either taking handouts from government, and I can only imagine how useless as a person you must feel not to be able to put yourself to work and to have to extend your hands every week or every month and just get money. And so I think to be able to give people opportunity to work and to be able to give people hope is our why from a company point of view, and answers the kind of the personal impact and personal legacy question as well.
Cool. How do you know when something is working or when to walk away? It's a question I get all the time.
Investors always ask in pitch meetings, and they always try and catch you out, and they're kind of like, they wait to see what you're going to answer because they know it's going to be the wrong thing. I think so. The Ben Horowitz book really sums it up well. So one of the chapters is he talks about the struggle. And like, the struggle is when you just, like, you had this dream and it's all not working out and it feels terrible and your team just don't believe in you anymore, and people are leaving your team who are really smart and capable, and the people who've left behind, who tend to be the ones who are not that smart and capable, are also wondering whether they should leave as well. And it's just like all around really crappy times. And I think the reason or when you should stop is when it's just about the struggle. Like, when you look back and you're not like, oh, the last few weeks were terrible, but we've gotten out of it, or but we've progressed. When you're just sitting in the struggle, that's when you should probably leave. I think the other reason to let things go is when the why stops meaning anything to you. And when that happens is when the struggle feels like it's not worth it. So you're like, this feels like shit, and it's not worth it anymore. I think that's when you should probably quit.
That's a really good answer. So how do you manage in the business taking on all these roles? You spoke about them, like managing people and doing the algorithms, and then also having kids, and you're the CEO of this company, and you're a first-time CEO. Practically, and I mean this in a very literal sense, how do you manage all these different things?
Yeah. I mean, I have to practically, I think, work more hours than I would otherwise have to try and manage everything.
But more productive hours, right?
More productive hours, but sometimes not also.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm working longer because I'm not good at those things.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm taking long, at putting together a financial model because it's hard, and I'm not an accountant.
Yeah.
So I think it's trying to learn, and again, reading a lot. and trying to read as widely as I can about the different things I need to do.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Cool.
and then the other thing is also having help.
Yeah.
And I think people don't talk about this enough, maybe. But having a support network at home, and I now unashamedly have an au pair and a nanny. And I get SweepSouth to help when it's too hectic for our nanny to, to clean. And it's, but the reality is that, if I wasn't doing that, I would be doing CEO, au pair, nanny, cleaner. It's just
not
impossible.
enough time in the day.
Yeah.
That is a really good segue into dealing with mental and physical health. It's something I try and highlight in all of these talks because, firstly, as a male, it's not something that is appropriate to talk about. Mental health, like it's not something that we do. I call my psychologist my mental coach because it makes people more receptive to the idea. So how do you deal with, let's start with mental health. Is it something you're conscious of and frequently discuss and are aware of, or is it something you just get through? Yeah,
it was something I got through. My parents have been through so much that, and growing up, it was very much about you just bear it, you just do. So it definitely was something that I think for a lot of my life, you must just deal with it and you try and remove yourself emotionally from mentally what you're going through. But it got to a point probably a year and a half ago where it became untenable to keep on doing that. I think both for myself and Alan. We sat down with one of our relatively early stage investors who also runs his own thing. And we sat and had a chat with him at this place called Hard Rock Cafe Anyway, and sat down and we sat with him over coffee and just said we don't know what's going on, but we constantly just feel tired. There's no relief from it. We're working crazy hours. We keep on promising ourselves that we're not going to, and we keep on doing it. And we're at the end of our tether. And he was it's called burnout. And he was you're close to it. And he'd been through it himself. So he'd experienced complete burnout, as in he'd crashed and had to take months off. And when he explained to us what he went through, we were wow, that is really bad, and we don't want to go through that. And so associating this, the bad mental health with the outcome of it, which is, bad for your personal self, bad for your family, bad for your company, I think encouraged us to go and get a coach and sit down with someone. And so we organized the session, and when we started speaking to her, she was you guys have a very unhealthy life. And we're going to work together to try and overhaul that. So I think without speaking to Jason, who's one of our investors, I don't think we would have been able to recognize how bad things were.
It's a key thing that most people, I try and often reiterate this, is that entrepreneurs put ourselves at the bottom of the list. And we think that that's the best thing for everyone around us. When actually the best thing for us is to put ourselves at the top of the list, be healthy, physical, eat well, sleep well, then everyone around you is happier because they want to work with you. They've come to work with you, not with the shittiest version of you.
Exactly.
And
no, absolutely.
What you've said is that mental health state affects all these parts of your life, and you just don't think it does. We just ignore it.
No, you reduce your capacity in every single role that you play as a human being when you're not at the top of your game or near at the top of your game as a person.
It's intense. And talk to me about physical fitness. I imagine with 3 kids, that is quite challenging.
I try and gym.
You can be honest, it's okay.
No, I think it's important, right? I definitely see the difference between Aisha on a day when I've gone to gym in the morning and, the kind of prep in your step that you have when you walk into the office versus not having, had that opportunity. And I also think for me personally, I'm an extreme person. So I'm either working out and then my diet is good. I'm I'm trying to reduce the caffeine and I don't need it, or it's the opposite and I'm not gymming, eating badly,
shoving all the sugar in your face.
All of the
that's
sugar,
my life.
Chocolate every day,
No, I relate.
cake every day,
Okay. You and I, when we chatted before, you mentioned the phrase "getting over yourself."
Yeah.
And you said something to the effect of, "We all take ourselves quite seriously."
Yeah.
And I mean, up until a year and a half ago, so did you guys.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that statement? Like,
Yeah.
this is not that serious.
Yeah.
None of us are building anything that serious.
Yeah.
Even old Theranos, they thought they were, but it
Yeah.
tanked. So
Yeah.
how do you feel? How do you give yourself that perspective to not take
Yeah.
yourself so seriously?
Yeah. I think you have to ask yourself, like, if all of this failed, what would happen?
Yeah.
And then be realistic about it. You know, like, if all of this failed, would the world crash? Would South Africa crash? Would even my team, like, you know, would my team be okay?
Yeah.
And the answer to all of that is probably. Like, yes, it would be really difficult. It would be a terrible experience to go through, but it would all be fine. So I think that's the kind of question we had to keep on asking ourselves. And then you can't take yourself seriously if you're not that important. If the world doesn't revolve around you, you know, you, yeah.
My partner and I, we have in our business a plan B. And the plan B for us is, if everything else blows up, we will literally move to a beachfront and become waiters with our dogs and live in a really affordable apartment.
Yeah, yeah.
And like,
Yeah.
that's okay.
Yeah, no,
I'm
I think
okay
it's,
with that.
and I think it's important to
Yeah.
have that. You know, and I, you know, I think it's important to have that kind of perspective, right? Because if you don't have that, then if everything fails, and this is, you know, people think like this. If everything fails, I'll commit suicide.
It's over. Yeah,
If
and then that
everything
meant
fails,
it just
my life
stayed
is over.
100%.
If everything fails, I'm not worth it anymore
No
as,
one will
as a
like
human
me.
being. No one will like me. I cannot, you know, I have to be ashamed of myself. So it is good to actually visualize like what would happen,
The
what
worst
would
case.
we do if in the worst case.
Yeah, I mean, having failed numerous times since I was 16, it's easier to go, it's not going to end.
Yeah.
It's going to suck
Yeah.
a lot
Yeah.
for a long time.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to eat a lot of humble pie.
Yeah.
But you get over it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. We've both spoken a bit today about ego.
Yeah.
So in your scenario, ego is quite an interesting thing because you work with your partner.
Yeah.
Because you have different relationships at home,
Yeah.
different relationships at work.
Yeah.
You're the CEO. How do those conversations go, and how do you deal with the ego in your relationship, in your company, and for yourself?
Yeah. So, I mean, ego is actually something I've had to deal with, but from a having more confidence and being able to assert myself point of view. It's something that I've worked with a lot with my coach, actually, where we've worked a lot on power and the concept of power, and not like, you know, you're a megalomaniac, but actually what power do you hold in different situations, and how do you leverage that power to give yourself confidence?
Okay.
And so it's something that I've had to, I mean, I'm a typical, like, yes person, you know, everything's a yes, and I hate upsetting people, I hate letting people down. But it's something that's so necessary, especially once you get a bit further down the line with building a business. You know, you've got to deliver news to your investors that's not great. You've got to have performance reviews that are not great. You've got to deliver bad results. So, so I had to actually develop a bit more of an ego and develop confidence. And it's been interesting seeing that play out, being more assertive as a founder, and sometimes having to be assertive in situations where my co-founder, who's my husband, is in the same room.
Yeah.
And, you know, and sometimes having to be assertive with him and be like, Alan, pipe down. I'm talking now, you know.
Yeah.
And then to go home and have to soften up the roles a little bit. Because as much as we are a very modern family, I mean, there's still a very traditional element to our family life, where I'm certainly not, you know, a quiet, subservient wife.
Yeah.
But, you know, but I am a mom and you know, and I think play a bit of a softer role at home.
Interesting. So I want to dive more into the friends and family thing. You mentioned earlier that you lost some friends.
Yeah.
Was that very specific and very calculated, or was it accidental?
Sometimes accidental, I think, with newer friendships where you just cannot find the time. And part of this is also being a yes person and having and developing that ability to say no. I don't have time for dinner. No, I don't have time to meet up. No, I don't have time for a coffee. So some of it was with relatively new friendships, not, you know, saying no and not letting friendships develop further. And then part of it was also, or part of it has been, having potential friendships that I just can't even consider. So, you know, you meet someone and you're like, we would have been best friends in another life, but I actually, honestly, don't have space to be your friend. And I think.
But that's a really hard and really
it's
honest
very hard.
way to look at it.
And I, you know, I was talking to my sister about it the other day, and I was saying to her that being someone who says yes a lot and is very conscious of not upsetting people, it's difficult to say to someone and to be honest. Like, you know, it doesn't help someone when I'm like, oh, next week. You know, sometimes you've got to be like, this, it's not about you, but I actually just don't have the time in my life right now for any additional relationships.
And then sucks. I apply one of my favorite sayings, offense is taken, not given. You're not trying to be offensive to that person. And if they're offended,
that's a very nice
that's
one.
their stuff, right?
Yeah.
Because you have to put yourself first at some point.
Yeah.
Okay. People, I get this a lot. People say to me, oh, my wife or my husband or my brother or my best friend, they do not think this is a good idea. Like, they don't support me building this business or doing this career change. What do you say to that? I'm sure you've had that.
Yeah. No, 100%. My mom told us that before starting a business, we should have 3 years of savings tucked away. And I was like, I will start a business in my 50s if that's the case. Like, I don't earn enough. I didn't earn enough to have like, So, so we definitely got that a lot. I think, I mean, I don't think you should forge ahead against all advice necessarily, right?
Okay.
Like, I think, firstly, this in many cases is coming from people who know you. And the other thing is that these are people who you're probably going to have to hit up at some point for money, right? And like to go to your parents and be like, in the face of everything you said, I'm going to do it anyways. And then come back a few months later and be like, oh,
hey guys,
everything's not going as planned. Can I borrow some money?
So that's very CEO strategic of you to think that way.
Yeah. So I mean, so I think you've got to be careful, but at the end of the day, you know, when you're old, they're not going to regret it if you didn't take the chance. You're going to regret it. So I think, you know, you've got to make decisions for yourself. But I don't like the idea of like, in the face of everyone telling me that it's a bad idea, I'm going to do it. I think with everything that I try and do personally, like you've got to take their advice for what it is and think about it logically and where it comes from and then make your own decisions.
I mean, I'm curious about the advice thing. It's not something that I prepped you on, but some of my favorite quotes about advice is taking someone else's advice is like listening to what lotto numbers won for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, you have now investors and advisors and a husband who you work with. Whose advice do you take? Because you can't take everyone's. Like, how do you pick?
It's contextual, right? Like, I will take my, even with investors, I will take on a business decision, I'll take the investor's advice who has run a business. I'll take people's advice contextually. What are they advising me about? It's not necessarily, I think it's not a blanket thing. Very dangerous to like, you know, I listen to this person no matter what. And I think speaks to the fact that your advice comes from your own experiences.
Cool. Okay, let's talk about parenting, and then we'll ask you a final question. So when we chatted, you expressed a lot of guilt to me about the business versus the parenting and your kids. So talk to me about that guilt and like, you had your first kid quite young. So everything you've done has been very consciously with children in your life. You've built them into your process. So how does that work?
I think it's tough, especially once they get older. So when I went home a little bit early today to spend some time with my kids so that we could come this evening. And when we were leaving, I called my sister who's looking after the kids, and I could hear the kids screaming and crying in the background because we were leaving. I mean, I know they're going to stop 5 minutes after we leave, but but it still does kind of get at your heartstrings. So it's tough, and I hope that the positive of it is that my two oldest kids are girls, and I hope that they will be, I hope the net positive will be that they see that their mom is able to be a mom. And I don't think I'm doing, although I feel like I'm not doing the best job, I don't feel like I'm doing a terrible job compared to other moms. I think as parents, and particularly as moms, because of all the pressure you get, I think you always feel like you could do better, but I don't think I'm doing a terrible job. And so I hope that the positive will be that my daughter goes, I can also be a mom and do whatever it is that I want to do in my professional life. But it's tough, and what I've had to be very careful about is teaching my kids that business always comes first. So just before we started to see our life coach, we I think had hit like a really bad point from a family life point of view. And I remember like a few weeks before our first meeting with her, my daughter said, she tried to show me something and then she stopped herself and she went, oh, your computer's open. I'll come to you later. And what we realized is that she actually had come to think that work is always more important than whatever it is that she wants to show me or tell me.
Yeah.
So I try and be more conscious. I try and be more present when I'm at home. We try and have blocks of time where we're just focused on kids and just focused on family life. Not always very good at it.
Sure.
But I mean, I think if you can balance parenthood and running a business, like I think it's such a rich life. Mm-hmm. Like I can't think about personally. I can't think about going home and not having, like the joy of kids who just want to tell you about their day, which is actually very mundane and very like, this person pulled my hair and whatever.
Yeah.
But there's something beautiful about that. Yeah.
And you spoke about, you hope your kids see in what you've done that they can do it too. You've got formidable parents.
Yeah.
Do you feel that? Like when you look at them and how they parented you, do you feel like you missed some parenting and they missed some childhood?
Yeah. Definitely. And I think both my parents will say the same thing. I think on the one hand, I'm really inspired by the sacrifices my parents have made. I also have a huge amount of respect for both of them as people, so not just as parents. I think having my mom particularly be such a busy person and someone who's really well accomplished, it's like, like I said, I want with my kids, it's shown me that you can have a family life and have a good career. And we're relatively functional. As she's had 4 kids, we're relatively functional, not too dysfunctional. And you can raise a functional, happy family. All 4 of her kids have a great relationship with our parents, amazing, and with each other.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I mean, we're absolutely obsessed with each other. Like we're on WhatsApp all the time on family WhatsApp group. So I think it's a good example. But do I feel like I missed out on parenting and having parents? Definitely, yes. Yeah, okay. I played the recorder for a long time when I was young.
Heard first here.
And, and I'd have these like recitals at the Baxter, and my parents could never ever come, and I distinctly remember that. So and from a very young age, I was I think 16 when my parents moved to Pretoria for work, and so was at home, and my younger brother was in boarding school, and so would have to be responsible for groceries at home and managing the house, and once I got a driver's license, fetching him from boarding school on weekends. So there was definitely quite a bit of like having to grow up quickly.
And so does that, having kids now, affect your ambitions? Does it soften them at all or increase them? Like how does it affect your ambitions in business?
I don't think it's affected my ambitions. I've always been a very ambitious person. I think it's affected my expectations for when things will happen.
Okay.
You have to, there's an element of my time that belongs to my family and belongs to my kids. And I think without children, I could very happily, and as a student, I'd very happily sleep in the lab, overnight and then and finish working, the first thing the next day. Whereas now I'm not going to do that, and I know that there's a side effect of that, which is that it's going to take longer to achieve some things.
Cool. And my final question: what advice are you happy you avoided?
My mom's advice about the 3 years. Yeah. It would have been impossible. Like,
Nice. Yeah, they're from a different age.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Cool.
Definitely. Waiting a lot longer and kind of suffering through things until I was ready.
Well, thank you so much for sharing with us. I'm going to open up to the floor. I think for a few questions, we've been here for about an hour, so I'm sure you're all getting restless.